Long before the age of AI slop, lots of characters have become internet memes. Mario, SpongeBob, the Minions, Among Us. But there are two characters that seem to exist in a completely different category: Shrek and Sonic the Hedgehog. For over 20 years now, the internet has done absolutely unspeakable things to these two. You've got Sonic, you've got Ugly Sonic, you've got Shrek is Love, Shrek is Life. You've got fan art that should probably require psychological evaluations. At some point, people even decided Shrek and Sonic should have children together. I don't know who started that. I don't want to know who started that, but somehow it exists. The internet has been obsessed with these two characters for decades. A constant presence. They're always back with new jokes, new edits, so many accursed images. It's almost like the internet collectively agreed that whenever things get weird, Shrek and Sonic should be there. But why these two? Why not Mario or Mickey Mouse or Bugs Bunny or anyone else? It seems completely random. Maybe some remnants of epic bacon random humor from the 2000s. But the more I start thinking about it, the more I realize that Shrek and Sonic actually have very similar histories. Both characters were created by companies trying to overthrow the biggest names in their industries. Both became massive cultural phenomena. Both eventually stumbled. Both became easy to laugh at. And somehow, those failures may have even made them more famous than success ever could. Happy 35th birthday, Sonic. Happy 25th birthday, Shrek. This is GabagoolTube, and today we're talking about why the internet's two favorite weird little guys may actually be the same character. Let's start with your boy Sonic. Back in the early 1990s, Nintendo was untouchable. The Nintendo Entertainment System had completely revived the video game industry after the crash of 1983. Mario was the king of video games. If you asked anyone to picture a video game character, they pictured Mario. Sega had hardware, and they had games, but they didn't have a mascot, so they decided to build one from scratch. But this guy had to be cooler than Mario. Mario was cheerful, Sonic was sarcastic. Mario walked, Sonic sprinted. Mario represented reliability, and Sonic represented the attitude of the 90s. If Nintendo was Disney, Sega wanted to be MTV. Their entire marketing campaign revolved around one simple message: Sega does what Nintendo don't. Looking back at it, it's definitely one of the most aggressively 90s advertising campaigns ever made. Everything had to be extreme. Sunglasses, electric guitars. It's very Poochie coded, which, but unlike Poochie, Sonic actually survived. Because Sonic actually fit into that moment. He had an attitude, he was super fast. His shoes were based off Michael Jackson on the Bad cover. His attitude was actually inspired by Bill Clinton? The early 90s were a weird time. The point is, Sonic was cool. Or at least he was what adults in 1991 thought kids believed was cool. Somehow they were very right. The original Sonic the Hedgehog became an enormous success, as well as Sonic 2, Sonic CD, Sonic 3D, and Knuckles. There was 2 Saturday morning cartoons. There was comic book, lunchboxes, cereal, Happy Meal toys. For a brief moment, Sonic genuinely challenged Mario. Sega took back a lot of market share away from Nintendo. For a brief moment in the early 90s, it did look like Mario was losing a lot of ground to Sonic. But then, of course, the industry changed again. And then in the mid-90s, every game company had to figure out how to use 3D. The future was no longer about side-scrolling. It was all about polygon count. Nintendo, being the ones to always survive any change in the industry, figured it out with Super Mario 64 and completely reinvented what a 3D platformer could even be. Sega did not have that luxury. Mario was a bit easier to pivot and figure out how to work in a 3D environment. Sonic was a fast-moving character, which inside a fully 3D environment turned out to be much harder than anyone ever expected. Multiple versions of a new Sonic game entered development. As the teams were infighting, a 3D Sonic game was fully scrapped, Sonic Extreme. Of course it had to be called Extreme, it was the 90s. Years of work, millions of dollars gone. Meanwhile, the Sega Saturn launched without a mainline Sonic game. For reference, imagine Nintendo releasing a new console today without Mario or Zelda. It's pretty unthinkable. Meanwhile, they even had a new competitor on the market with Sony releasing the PlayStation for $100 cheaper than the Saturn. Rough time. It's pretty much an entire generation that Sonic missed out on. For Sega's next console, they weren't going to make the same mistakes as they did with the Saturn. With the Dreamcast, it was finally a 3D Sonic game. Sonic Adventure. The Dreamcast itself is remembered very fondly today, but commercially it was a disaster. In 2001, Sega did what would have sounded impossible just a few years earlier. They stopped making consoles and they became a third-party publisher, creating games for all their competition, including newcomer Xbox, the Sony PS2, and, imagine this if you're a child of the 90s, Nintendo. Yes, Sonic would be on the Nintendo GameCube. If you grew up during the console wars, seeing Sonic standing next to Mario in Super Smash Bros. Felt like Batman joined the Avengers. It didn't seem possible, but Sonic survived. The problem was his games never really found the same consistency ever again. again. And that's where things started getting very weird. When people talk about Sonic today, it's easy to forget just how strange the franchise became during the 2000s. Because after Sega exited the console business, Sonic entered what fans affectionately and sometimes painfully refer to as the Dark Age. Now to be fair, there's plenty of good Sonic games from there. The handheld games remain surprisingly consistent, such as Sonic Advance and Sonic Rush. And of course, most Sonic fans have a soft spot for Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2, flawed as they are. But when most people think about the Sonic of the 2000s, they don't really think about the good games. They think about the bad ones, like Shadow the Hedgehog. This is one of those games that feels like a parody. Sega was chasing what other 3D platformers on the PS2 were doing at the time, such as Ratchet and Clank and Jak 2. Platformers that include weapons. In the case of Jak 2, the games were getting darker, and the characters were carrying guns, so everything had to be gritty. So of course, someone at Sega looked at this cartoon hedgehog and thought, you know what? Give him an Uzi. Somehow this actually happened. Shadow rides motorcycles, he fires machine guns, and he swears. Wow. Says things like damn. It's a very odd Sonic game. It's a little emo coded. I was there at the time, and people could not believe this was real. And somehow things got even worse. In 2006, for the 15th anniversary, Sega released what was supposed to be Sonic's Grand Return, a reboot. The game was simply called Sonic the Hedgehog. Most people today now just call it Sonic 06. Now, if you've never played Sonic 06, consider yourself fortunate. The game launched completely unfinished. A buggy mess with characters falling through floors and loading screens lasting forever, and physics that barely functioned. And the story. My god. The story. This game somehow asks players to sincerely invest in a romance between Sonic and a human princess. Yes, an actual human princess who kisses Sonic. It generally feels like someone accidentally turned a piece of fanfiction into a multi-million-dollar PS3 game. And overnight, Sonic became a punchline. Speaking of 2006, this was the year that Google bought YouTube, and it was exploding in popularity. People were uploading glitch compilations, comedy reviews, let's plays. In the early days of YouTube, you could find an entire genre of videos poking fun at Sonic 06. Entire internet careers were built around making fun of this game. The kind of failure that people never forget. Concurrently with this, I feel like I need to bring this up, but there were the comics. Now, I could probably make an entire video just trying to explain the Archie Sonic comics, and honestly, I still don't think I'd understand them. I remember liking them as a little kid, but that was just because I was really into Sonic, but looking at them with adult eyes now, it's a lot. If you're unaware, for decades Archie Comics produced an ongoing Sonic series that expanded the universe in directions Sega would have never imagined. Suddenly Sonic was the leader of a resistance movement fighting against the evil Dr. Robotnik. Characters got married, characters died. There were political conspiracies, family bloodlines, alternate dimensions, long-running soap opera storylines, original characters with increasingly elaborate backstories. The comics took themselves incredibly seriously. I need to talk about Ken Penders for a moment. A prolific writer, Penders introduced hundreds of original Echidna characters into the Sonic universe. Later, after leaving Archie, he became involved in one of the strangest legal battles in comic book history, claiming ownership over many of those original creations. The lawsuits fundamentally changed the Sonic comics for years. It's one of those stories that becomes more confusing the longer you look into it. And it's kind of the point. The deeper you explore Sonic Online, the weirder everything becomes. There was always another rabbit hole, another obscure piece of internet history. There was also DeviantArt. If you're on the internet in the late 2000s, you already know where this is going. Sonic became one of the most popular subjects for fan art online. People create original Sonic characters, entire families of Sonic characters. Sonic fandom became one of the largest creative communities on the internet. And with that came all the strange corners that naturally emerge whenever millions of people start creating art together. By this point, Sonic wasn't just a video game character anymore, he'd become internet folklore. There was always another weird image. Every time you thought you'd seen the weirdest Sonic content imaginable, someone somehow found a way to top it. Again, there's another rabbit hole that I really rather not get into here, but there's the Chris Chan factor. I really don't want to talk about this because of how disturbing the story is, but he did create the internet comic Sonic Chew, and that is tangentially related to all this, so I feel like I should mention it. But if you want to know more about that, if you dare, there is a 50-hour or 50-part YouTube documentary that you could look up. It's a long one, but it's pretty amazing in how comprehensive it is. Yeah, it's I don't even know what to do with this one. Moving on. In 2019, Hollywood accidentally poured gasoline on the fire. When Paramount revealed the first trailer for the live-action Sonic movie, people couldn't believe what they were seeing. The human teeth. It looked very wrong. The internet immediately exploded. Memes flooded every corner of social media. And within weeks, the studio made one of the most unprecedented decisions in blockbuster history. They delayed the movie and completely redesigned Sonic, and it actually worked. The finished films became huge hits, with a fourth movie on the way next year. And something funny happened. The original design never really disappeared. Ugly Sonic became another internet legend. So much so that Disney eventually turned him into a joke in the Chip and Dale's Rescue Rangers movie. Think about how bizarre that is. A rejected movie design became famous enough to receive its own cinematic comeback. Only Sonic could pull that off, because by this point, failure had become part of the character's identity. But if Sonic was the internet's favorite lovable disaster, Shrek's journey somehow became even stranger, because unlike Sonic, Shrek started as a joke, and somehow the joke ended up beating Disney. Before there was Shrek, there was a grudge. In the 90s, there was no entertainment company more dominant than Disney. And standing right in the middle of that success was Jeffrey Katzenberg. Chairman of Walt Disney Feature Animation, Katzenberg played a huge role in turning Disney Animation back into a powerhouse. But after the death of Disney president Frank Wells in 1994, Katzenberg expected to be promoted. Instead, Michael Eisner said no, and Katzenberg left the company. Depending on who you ask, he quit, or he was fired. Either way, he wasn't happy, so alongside Steven Spielberg and David Geffen, he co-founded DreamWorks. If Sonic was created to challenge Nintendo, DreamWorks Animation eventually became the studio that wanted to challenge Disney, and no one embodied that mission more than Shrek. Now what's funny is that almost everything people love about Shrek today started as something Disney probably would have rejected. Early in Toy Story's development, Katzenberg had pushed for an edgier movie. When the film was screened, everyone was completely put off by it. The Woody character was just too upsetting. The entire film had to be scrapped, and the rest is history. The key note to take away from this is that Katzenberg wanted to make edgier animated films. He really wanted a film to be nominated for Best Picture, which Beauty and the Beast had done. So after that, they were chasing more prestigious animated movies, such as Pocahontas and The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which didn't work out, but you could kind of see what they were going for there. You even saw this more when Katzenberg developed The Prince of Egypt. But truly, nothing was more Katzenberg than Shrek. The film was designed as a spite store to get back at Disney, and it worked. Coming off a decade of Disney fairy tales, Shrek farting in the face of all these Disney fairy tale characters was a breath of fresh air. And also, when you take a closer look at the villain, Lord Farquaad, you could see how he was designed to resemble Michael Eisner. Again, this movie was created out of spite. Shrek became a phenomenon. It won the very first Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. The soundtrack was everywhere. Kids have quoted it endlessly. Smash Mouth's longest lasting legacy is being on the Shrek soundtrack. In this moment, Shrek was cooler than Disney. Then came the sequels. Shrek 2 is genuinely beloved. A lot of people, including me, think it's just as good as the original, maybe even better. But success has a funny way of becoming excess. Throughout the 2000s, you couldn't escape Shrek. And by the time the Shrek the Third was coming out in 2007, people were starting to get tired. In fact, the marketing campaign was so exhausting that Adult Swim's Tim and Eric took it upon themselves to, as a joke, even though they were not being paid by DreamWorks or anyone involved in the movie, start sarcastically promoting Shrek the Third on their own. Shrek was so inescapable, it was a joke. The franchise had become a victim of its own popularity. And that time it was pretty interesting, because 2007 also happened to be the exact moment the modern internet was being born. Between YouTube exploding, Facebook opening up to everyone, the iPhone launching, the internet was changing from a collection of websites to a place where culture happened. And one of the defining traits of the early internet was irony. Suddenly, one of the funniest things you could do wasn't just to say that you like Shrek, it was pretending that Shrek was the greatest artistic achievement in human history. One of the earliest examples of this was something on 4chan called Shrek is Love, Shrek is Life. Now, I'm not going to describe this in detail, but if you know, you know. It started a bizarre internet copy pasta before being turned into an animated video. It's grotesque and uncomfortable. Somehow millions of people have watched it. I mean, I've watched it plenty of times. I think it's funny. It perfectly captures the internet's sense of humor. Shrek is less of a movie and more of an internet deity at this point. He's been edited into everything. You couldn't predict where you'll see Shrek next. And that's where I started to realize something. This isn't unique to Shrek. This is how the internet has been treating Sonic. Both characters have escaped their original creators. Sega doesn't control Sonic anymore, not really. DreamWorks doesn't control Shrek anymore, not really. The internet has adopted them as memes. Cursed memes. Corporations had no control over this until they started investing in AI, but that's a whole nother story. There's still a question to ask. Why these two? There are plenty of characters that become overexposed, and there's plenty of characters that have had bad sequels. So why did Sonic and Shrek become the internet's favorite toys? At this point, Shrek and Sonic have followed a similar trajectory. They started as challengers, they became icons, they became overexposed, and then they became jokes. But not the kind of jokes that kill a character. Sonic and Shrek are not failures. They're raw material to be used to do anything with. Think about what actually happened to Sonic. A character created beat Mario ends up starring in games so chaotic that entire YouTube careers are built around laughing at them. A character so broken in one release it becomes a global meme factory. A character redesigned after internet backlash, then reintroduced into the culture that mocked him in the first place, and he was loved. Shrek follows a similar pattern, but in a slightly different direction. Shrek started as satire, a movie that existed to make fun of Disney fairy tales that became so successful successful, it effectively replaces the thing it was mocking. But then it got overexposed, and so overexposed by the late 2000s, Shrek is not a character anymore, he's just shorthand for memes and absurd humor. Shrek is love, Shrek is life. Shrek raves. Shrek is a canvas on a global scale. Sonic and Shrek didn't become meme legends because they were perfect. They became meme legends because they were already unstable. Mario and Mickey Mouse are carefully managed, protected like national infrastructure. These characters are designed to be consistent across decades, and they don't break. But the thing about Sonic, he has periods where he feels cool, and then there's periods where he feels like he's the butt of the joke. Shrek is similar in that way. He starts as anti-Disney satire, and then he becomes Disney-level corporate saturation. Both characters carry contradictions inside them, and the internet loves contradiction. When something feels slightly off or slightly embarrassing or chaotic just to make us unstable, it becomes perfect meme fuel. That's why Sonic exists, and that's why Shrek is Love exists. That's why Shrek Retold exists, without ever feeling like they're breaking anything sacred. Because nothing about them was fully sacred to begin with. They were already loose and half serious. Maybe that's the real reason they feel so connected. Sonic represents a franchise that tried to be cool, as well as Shrek. Both of them ended up in the same place, not as icons of perfection, but of icons of failure and reinvention. This is GabagoolTube, and somehow this was a video about Sonic and Shrek.